No buzz. Just Bees Book Club. Buckle up. It's the Year of Proust. It's the joking name for the book club that I've started with another person. There's a couple other people sort of involved, in which, at least speculatively, reading 100 pages of Proust a day for a year, because that's about how many pages there are in Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. Do you know this one? Have you heard of this one? I've read it before. I initially read Swan's Way, I think early in college, and not for any, I think just for me. And then in my senior year, I took my senior seminar on Proust. So, graduated the literature major, modern literary studies specifically. Haha. Modernism, as it were, sometimes. More contemporary fiction, honestly, for me. But the class that I took, the seminar, 8 people, 1 professor. We read, if memory serves, we read the first 3, and the final one was like sort of the class schedule. We skipped. I don't remember if we skipped Sodom and Gomorrah, but the Captive and the Prisoner, I believe, were like optional. But I had already read Swan's Way, so I like kind of skimmed through it in that class. And if I'm remembering right, this is well over a decade ago at this point. I think what I tried to do was skim through Swan's Way while simultaneously reading the Captive and the Fugitive at the beginning, and then jump back into sequence within a Budding Grove. Go on to I always forget the third book's title. The Guermantes Way, and then finish off. I think I never technically finished Time Regained. I am reading, as you might be able to tell, not just the the Moncrieff and Kilmartin translation, revised by Enright and with an introduction by Richard Howard. I am in fact reading the copy of it that I read and posted big ol' post-it notes in back in 2008 or 2009 when I took this class. Oh, look at that. Phaedra, the Cid. Interesting. So yeah, I've been reading 100 pages of Proust a week, more or less. We've already fallen seriously off track, and I have no idea when I'm going to sequence this to be going up. So it's deeply out of date, I'm sure, by the time this video goes up. But yeah, it's a big project. The big story I have from that is that I received an A+ on my paper. I believe the only A+ I received in college. I went to a college that had just started doing grades again after only doing evaluations for a very long time. That doesn't really have anything to do with it. I just think it's extremely funny that someone would give a student an A+ in college where it doesn't, have a GPA, concern. I've also got my little notebook where I was taking some notes. I kind of fell off after Swan in Love, but I already sort of flipped through these. And yeah, I guess to sort of intro it, the paper I ended up writing, I haven't gone back to it, but my big argument, if I'm remembering correctly from quite some time ago, was centered around Proust's use of language, specifically his tendency to move from situations which he frames as general observations about people, and the way that those general observations, through the machinations of Proust's long, elaborate, aesthetically beautiful sentences, just as a very top line thing here, I love these books. There's so much, and I'm gonna talk about them as best I can here. Book by book, I guess, as is the No Buzz way. So these incredibly general sort of sentiments or broadly framed truths about people or aesthetic objects, songs, paintings, etc. He'll frame this super broadly and be like, this is the way things are, or it is true about this category of thing that, et cetera, et cetera. And through those sentences, he is able to affect a transformation into the particular, in a way that, and this is where I get a little, have a harder time remembering what my particular argument was. But I think I was tying it back to the Madeline. Obviously, the Madeline's the whole thing, right? I actually, on this read, kind of had some thoughts about that. But specifically to like the larger project, to the way of the way his sort of whole intention is to encapsulate with incredible minute detail one personal life that engages so deeply with aesthetic concerns, but also just the project as a whole, the way that it keeps seeing, it sees the world, it frames the world, and in framing the world, it becomes an individual. It becomes the particular, it becomes the universal in some way. So that's sort of like my background, right? I read these books almost 15 years ago at this point. Engaged with them very deeply. Had a professor, I believe, Professor Dick Gregory, was the leader of that seminar. I remember extremely little about him, although he capably led me through Proust, which is no mean feat. I think there's a real there's a reason I'm doing this in a no buzz book club as well, right? It is a book that desperately needs. That's not true. There are books that desperately need a person to interlocute with, or a person to guide you through them. And I'm extremely glad my first time through was being guided in a very high pressure situation. I mean, it was senior seminar. I literally needed to complete one of those to be able to graduate. Although I was like way over my credits, so it would have been fine if I failed, but like whatever. A college degree on the line, 10 weeks basically, because it was a quarter system to go through Proust. And I came out of that not just being like, wow, that was really pretty and I couldn't stand it. I came out of being like, that was one of the more aesthetically opening experiences I've ever had in my life. And, not life changing in the way that it could be, but like, I have definitely had a different appreciation for a lot of things because of Proust. I think the most obvious one is I didn't particularly care for flowers, and I'm not a big flower person in my day-to-day, despite all the floral patterns. Like actual flowers are not my favorite thing in the world. I don't dislike them, but I just don't notice them. But when I do notice them, it is always through this Proustian sense. It's always this. There's a love that the man has for especially specific kinds of aesthetic objects, but like the one for me was flowers. I mean, the way he talks about music is incredible. The way he talks about painting. I wonder if I can find this note really quick. I wasn't actually going to bring this up, but oh, that's all right. That's in Swan and Love. My thoughts about Swan and Love are, I think, very different this time than they were the time before. Oh gosh. Also, there was a number of little bits of anti-Semitism in here that I definitely did not notice last time, or if I had forgotten about it, if I did. Yeah, we're talking page 82. I'll go to the book because my handwriting is terrible. Just to sort of get us off on a particular kind of foot. Yeah, this is it. There were 2 tapestries of high warp representing the coronation of Esther. Tradition had it that the weaver had given to Ahasuerus the features of one of the kings of France, and to Esther those of a lady of Guermantes, whose lover he had been, to which the colors, in melting into one another, had added expression, relief, and light. A touch of pink over the lips of Esther had strayed beyond their outline. The yellow of her dress was spread so unctuously, so thickly as to have acquired a kind of solidity, and stood out boldly against the receding background, while the green of the trees, still bright in the lower parts of the panel of silk and wool, but quite gone at the top, gone in quotation marks, brought out in a paler tone, above the dark trunks, the yellowing upper branches, gilded and half obliterated by the sharp, though sidelong rays of an invisible sun. It's specifically the line, a touch of pink over the lips of Esther had strayed beyond their outline. This incredibly meticulous eye for detail, and for the details that truly matter, is, I think, the strength of Proust's approach to writing about aesthetics that is the key to my heart. Not to sound hyperbolic. So yeah, let's see. How do you tackle Proust? How do you tackle Proust? For those who don't know, I guess, which is weird since this is a Just Bees book club. For those who don't know, I guess, Swan's Way is part one of a 7-part novel called In Search of Lost Time. Swan's Way focused on the protagonist, who is the narrator, maybe is a better word, who is fairly young in this, although we're never really given an indication of how young. In a way that this reading, I was like, is this kid 4? I mean, he can read, so probably not. It could be 4, but maybe he's like 12? And the answer is he's a number of ages over the course of this thing. But it is, so Swan's Way specifically is the story of this young kid. It opens sort of with a long meditation on his obsession with getting a kiss goodnight from his mother, that bleeds into the sort of the famous thing from this book, which is he has a madeleine, a little sort of shell-shaped cookie, like an oyster, not an oyster shell, like a clamshell shaped cookie, dipped in some sort of floral tea, that sort of rockets him backwards in his life, that like brings up these very old memories. And this is, I think, the narrator writing from a much later perspective, that like where he has what I think sort of is spoken of in scholarly terms as involuntary memory. I think he uses the phrase voluntary memory, but not involuntary. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not taking that detailed of notes. I'm not in a class on this right now. In which he sort of relives this time in his past, and sort of his first love is sort of the like bigger frame here. He then goes on to talk about his first love's father, a man named Swan, 2 N's last name. Swan's Way, of course, related to Swan because I believe it's the Messe way, is like one of the 2 ways his family would walk depending on whether or not it was going to be rainy. This is all in mid to late 1800s. Again, depending on, I think, when we think what age we think he is. It was written itself in the early 1900s. And most of it was about a little less than half of it was published after Proust himself had passed away and was unfinished as of his death. The narrator remains unnamed throughout this. I have my foreknowledge, so I know that at some point in one of the ones that he did not finish, I'm pretty sure, he like sort of half jokingly says like, you can call me Marcel just for sake of ease for right now or whatever. So it's like a, fictionalized, it's a heavily influenced by autobiography novel. And so we sort of, in very broad strokes, follow our narrator growing up a little bit, having aspirations toward being a writer, and then they're dashed and brought back, and et cetera, et cetera. And then in sort of his home life and the ways in which that is disrupted. His falling in love, his discovering more and more about Swan himself, and then the book breaks into a new part called Swan in Love, which, as mentioned a second ago, hit real different this time around. And then, and so this is about Swan falling in love with Odette de Crécy, who ends up being the mother of the love interest Gilberte. And their long and harried courtship, and then once that section of the book is over, and we learn things like, Swan is like this really sort of high level socialite. Despite being the son of a stockbroker, he's like literally friends with I think it would have been Prime Minister of France at the time, like, but he's like, he sort of falls from grace with like the high society because of this love, and so he ends up going to this salon with the Verdurins, who are this, like, basically it's like a comic aside that becomes this huge tragic mess. It's extremely funny at parts too, which is weird. And then we cut back to the protagonist, the narrator, in the chapter Place Names the Name. It's got to be the name, right? Yeah, Place Names the Name, where we go back from this like huge long sentence dreamy style at the beginning, in Cambrai specifically. It sort of pares down in Swan in Love. It's still beautifully written, but the page long sentence is not nearly as if there's a page long sentence in there, you notice, as opposed to in the first part and the third part, where you could read for 2 pages and just be like, oh, there was a period there. It all just comes so beautifully together in language, and it's great to have that just in this first book, even, right? To have the moment where he breaks away from this dreamy, loving style of memory, this like way of evoking shadows, just in the third indefinite clause, or the third clause within a sentence, that like sort of coat the rest of them. It goes sort of back to that language. This is the third part, which is it's fascinating, right? Because a lot of the like worry about Proust, right, is like, oh, there's these long sentences, it's complicated, there's all these references to French shit that I don't know, etc., etc. The references, I just goodbye. I don't. It's fine. But the way that Proust both proves he can write in different styles within this single book, I think is really promising for the rest of the books. I'm a person with terrible memory. This is part of why I do these projects, or these videos. To even just remember that I read a book in a certain year or whatever. But also, because of that, I have some jumbled memories of the rest of the books, but I don't have a lot of distinct. I couldn't tell you what happens in Guermantes Way versus Within a Budding Grove versus whatever. I can sort of tell you now what happens in Swan's Way as opposed to the other ones, but that'll also fade into the soup at some point. So that's the high level. Narrator, the kid, meets Madeline at some point, misses his mom's kiss, falls in love with a girl, talks about her dad for a real long time and in really excruciating ways in some points, and then he goes and sees a play that he like tried to see when he was younger and got so worked up about seeing a play that he got really sick, and had to be like bedridden for a week. And he has a long talk with Monsieur de Norpois. He was like a weird little no, wait, that's book 2. Never mind. Told you I could not quite remember what happens in each book. I think the last bits I just described are all things that happen in book 2. I'm now about 70 pages into Within a Budding Grove. Okay, how are we doing? 20 minutes in. This really could go for an hour and a half. It shan't. So just to sort of refresh myself on some notes. Like I said, there's a note. The second note I took, I have no idea how old this character is for the Mama's Kiss segment. And then the third note I took was the Mama's Kiss is so much more impactful to me, maybe just as a representation of the interiority of anxiety, than the Madeline. Which there's a thing I want to talk about with the Madeline in just a second that I have. This is one of the bookmarks I have in here. Hey, support the Prisoners Literature Project. It's great. Um, yeah, so the whole opening scene, the thing I remembered most from it is there is a magic lantern, which is like a little shade that one puts over, I believe, an open flame at this point still. I don't believe they have interior illumination or like electric illumination. Um, but it's like a little shade that it sort of rotates, and it'll have images, so that it casts shadows. I believe this is the Arabian Nights specifically, and there's like these beautiful evocative descriptions of the ways, not just like the scene itself that is being played out on the wall, but the way that the scene deforms around the narrator's doorknob, that like heartbreaking. And like I said, there's like there's a play with shadows throughout this whole first part that I think is interwoven with the play of memory that is just beautiful. But specifically, the way that Proust at length describes the narrator's like anticipation of and anxiety about whether or not his mother will come up and kiss him at the end of the evening, like kiss him goodnight, um, is not a thing that I relate to on a level of like this is a thing that happened to me. But the description itself is such fucking tightly written, like heart crushing description of like anxiety and the fixations that anxiety can like produce. That once I got to the Madeline and that section was kind of over, I was like, wow, I don't think I could handle that much more of of this character like losing his absolute mind about like whether or not he's gonna get a kiss from his mom goodnight that night, and like going so far as to like do these huge machinations about like sending Francoise to tell her that like he has something to tell her, that he's got like this something she forgot or whatever, like this, whatever it exactly was. Like it's um I found that part of the book extremely affecting this time around. But yeah, I also want to talk about Madeline's a little bit here. I think this is the thing I have. Um, yeah. So yeah, again, Madeline is this huge. I think it's thought of as the central sort of image of the book, and I think it's the one that people who know anything about the book know anything about. But again, it's he tastes this Madeline that's been dipped in tea, and it basically sends him back in time, in his own mind. He like can perfectly start to imagine this thing he hasn't thought about for a long time, which is his aunt, who's dying. And much to be said about Aunt Leonie, but it probably won't be here. Leonie, maybe. Um, do do do. Yeah, sort of the setup, right? So it was that for a long time afterwards, when I lay awake at night and revived old memories of Cambrai, I saw no more of it than this sort of luminous panel, sharply defined against a vague and shadowy background, like the panels which the glow of a Bengal light or a searchlight beam will cut out and illuminate in a building. The other parts in a building, the other parts of which remain plunged in darkness, broad enough at its base, the little parlor, the dining room, the opening of the dark path from which Monsieur Swan, the unwitting author of my sufferings, would emerge, the hall through which I would journey to the first step of that staircase, so painful to climb, which constituted, all by itself, the slender cone of this irregular pyramid. And at that summit, my bedroom, with a little passage through whose glazed door Mamma would enter. In a word, seen always at the same evening hour, isolated from all its possible surroundings, detached and solitary against the dark background, the bare minimum of scenery necessary, like the decor one sees prescribed on the title page of an old play for its performance in the provinces, to the drama of my undressing, as though all Cambrai had existed of but 2 floors joined by a slender staircase, and as though there had been no time there but 7 o'clock at night. So that's just him talking about how he remembers this time in his life, right? This time that I was just describing, the Mama's Kiss section. Um, uh, do, 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 do. She sent for me one of those squat, plump little cakes called Petit Madeleines. Blah, 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 blah. And so this is the Madeline moment. I want to talk about this for reasons I will get to in just a second. No sooner had the warm liquid mixed with the crumbs touched my palate than a shiver ran through me, and I stopped, intent upon the extraordinary thing that was happening to me. This is the part that people know, just to be clear. An exquisite pleasure had invaded my senses, something isolated, detached, with no suggestion of its origin. And at once the vicissitudes of life had become indifferent to me, its disasters innocuous, its brevity illusory. This new sensation having had the effect, which love has, of filling me with a precious essence. Or rather, this essence was not in me, it was me. I had ceased now to feel mediocre, contingent, mortal. Whence could it have come to me, this all-powerful joy? I sensed that it was connected with the taste of the tea and cake, but that it infinitely transcended those savors, could not, indeed, be of the same nature. Where did it come from? What did it mean? How could I seize and apprehend it? 3 questions in a row is extremely rare in this book, and I think that's the bit people remember, right? The next paragraph, or that's the way it stuck in my brain and the way I've heard it talked about. He takes a sip of this tea. People say he eats the Madeleine, but he technically, I think, takes a sip of the tea, and he's transported back to Cambrai. The next paragraph, though, says, I drink a second mouthful, in which I find nothing more than the first. Then a third, which gives me rather less than the second. It is time to stop. The potion is losing its virtue. It is plain that the truth I am seeking lies not in the cup, but in myself. The drink has called it into being, but does not know it, and can only repeat indefinitely, with a progressive diminution of strength, the same message which I cannot interpret, though I hope at least to be able to call it forth again and to find it there presently, intact and at my disposal, for my final enlightenment. I put down the cup and examine my own mind. It alone can discover the truth. But how? What an abyss of uncertainty whenever the mind feels overtaken by itself, when it, the seeker, is at the same time the dark region through which it must go seeking, where all its equipment will avail it nothing. Seek, more than that, create. It is face to face with something which does not yet exist, which it alone can make actual, which it alone can bring into the light of day. And I begin again to ask myself what it could have been, this unremembered state which brought with it no logical proof but the indisputable evidence of its felicity, its reality, and in whose presence other states of consciousness melted and vanished. And skipping ahead a little bit, and so that nothing may interrupt it in its course, I shut out every obstacle, every extraneous idea. I stop my ears and screen my attention from the sounds from the next room. And then, feeling that my mind is tiring itself without having any success to report, I compel it for a change to enjoy the distraction which I have just denied it, to think of other things, to rest and refresh itself before making a final effort. And then, for a second time, I clear an empty space in front of it. I place in position before my mind's eye the still recent taste of that first mouthful, and I feel something start within me, something that leaves its resting place and attempts to rise, something that has been anchored at a great depth. I do not know yet what it is, but I can feel it mounting slowly. I can measure the resistance. I can hear the echo of great spaces traversed. That to me was a revelation on this reread. I totally forgot that the Madeleine isn't this magical, like, take a bite, new chapter, we're back in the past moment. It's take a sip, go, what's that? I can't quite get, maybe if I, no, hold on, I guess I have to, like, think about this for a little bit. I have to just sit here and consciously recall this thing, because it's not a magic. It's not a magic. It is a person having a sense memory that is so faded that it's hard to pin down, and then having to repeat that and realizing the repetition isn't enough, so having to sort of isolate, and then from that isolation, let things back in until He feels comfortable re-isolating and focusing, and it's work. The involuntary memory is work. It's fucking lovely. I'm so happy about that. Another really dumb note that I wrote down that is not very important, but just to sort of transition away from this because I can't keep going on and on about how much I love that. It was page 4. I wrote, "This is the whole of House on the Borderlands" by William Hope Hodgson, which is another book. I think I have a video about that one. Like, I think I read that this year, or listened to it again this year, or last year, I guess. Let's see. When a man is asleep, he has in a circle around him the chain of the hours, the sequence of the years, the order of the heavenly bodies. Instinctively he consults them when he wakes, and in an instant reads off his own position on the earth's surface, and the time that has elapsed during his slumbers. But this ordered procession is apt to grow confused and to break its ranks. Suppose that, William Hope Hodgson, suppose that, towards morning, after a night of insomnia, sleep descends upon him while he was reading, in quite a different position from that in which he normally goes to sleep. He has only to lift his arm to arrest the sun and turn it back in its course, and at the moment of waking he will have no idea of the time, but will conclude that he has just gone to bed. Or suppose that he dozes off in some even more abnormal and divergent position, sitting in an armchair, for instance, after dinner. Then the world will go hurtling out of orbit. The magic chair will carry him at full speed through time and space, and when he opens his eyes again, he will imagine that he went to sleep months earlier in another place. This is the idea of an armchair flying through space. Those who have read House on the Borderlands, come on, you know what I'm talking about. I'm gonna skip this one. There's a whole thing about lesbianism and being born this way and shit in this book. This is like a corny shit. Like spies on two girls like making out. It's not great. Proust, it should be said, is pretty well known to be a gay author. The thing I remember Professor Gregory bringing up a number of times is like, it's weird how he falls in love with Gilbert, like Gilbert, and Albertine, like Albert, isn't it? Gregory, I believe, was also gay, but I don't know. Professor Gregory. Yeah, so what's this last one that I wanted to explicitly bring up? Oh yeah, I wrote a note that was basically like, I don't necessarily come to this books for truth, but I do, but like, goddamn, is this true? This is in Swan in Love, and I think hopefully me reading out some of this can sort of corroborate what I was saying earlier about the way that Swan in Love has a different cadence, although that last bit was a lot, the Madeline bit is a lot less, sentence as paragraph than a lot of Cambrai is. So this is a bit sort of like pretty deep into their relationship, and I guess to do the thing. The reason Swan in Love hit me different this time is because Swan seems like a complete fucking asshole. He just seems like a bad dude, honestly, throughout a lot of this, especially when he's like pining for Odette. From top to bottom. When he knows that Odette is in love with her more than he's in love with is in love with him, more than he's in love with her, he's like an aloof prick. When he realizes that he's fallen more in love, and so she's like backing away a little bit, he becomes this controlling, manipulative, absolute bitch. The like whole sequence where he like confronts her about having had other lovers and like basically calls her a dyke is just fucking miserable. Swan comes off so miserable in my read of it this time, at least. It's just like I said about the mama's kiss thing, right? Proust has demonstrated that he can write anxiety in a way that I've never ever experienced anyone else write it, both in terms of like relatability and just like the cadence and yeah, it's beautiful. This meditation on jealousy that he does here, maybe it's just because I'm not as familiar with the emotion, maybe it's because I just don't care for it. But this fucking like 300-page meditation on jealousy is like just excruciating, and to me paints Swan as a miserable man in many ways. But so this is a bit like sort of well into their affair, um, where the narrator sort of just talks about Odette, how she's a particularly bad liar, and then here's yeah. So this is like Swan is like out in town, and he's like, oh, maybe I'll pay Odette a random visit, which I don't usually see her. That she'll love that, won't she? Again, like completely manipulative shit. He goes and rings the doorbell, and he's told she's not there or whatever. And then after waiting an hour, he returned. He found her at home. She told him that she had been in the house when he rang, but had been asleep. The bell had awakened her. She had guessed that it must be Swan, and had run to meet him, but he had already gone. She had, of course, heard him knocking at the window. Swan could at once detect in this story one of those fragments of literal truth which liars, when caught off guard, console themselves by introducing into the composition of the falsehood which they have to invent, thinking that it can be safely incorporated and will lend the whole story an air of verisimilitude. It was true that when Odette had just done something she did not wish to disclose, she would take pains to bury it deep down inside herself. But as soon as she was found herself face to face with the man to whom she was obliged to lie, she became uneasy. All her ideas melted like wax before a flame. Her inventive and her reasoning faculties were paralyzed. She might ransack her brain, but could find only a void. Yet she must say something, and there lay within her reach precisely the fact which she had wished to conceal, and which, being the truth, was the only one thing that had remained. She broke off from it a tiny fragment of no importance in itself, assuring herself that after all it was the best thing to do, since it was a verifiable detail, and less dangerous, therefore, than a fictitious one. At any rate, that's true, she said to herself, which is something to the good. He may make inquiries, and he'll see that it's true, so at least it won't be that gives me away. But she was wrong. It was what gave her away. She had failed to realize that this fragmentary detail of the truth had sharp edges which could not be made to fit in, except with those contiguous fragments of the truth from which she had arbitrarily detached it, edges which, whatever the fictitious details in which she might embed it, would continue to show by their overlapping angles and by the gaps she had forgotten to fill in, but its proper place was elsewhere. That was the bit where I was like, as a person who used to lie a lot, you really do think, oh, I'll just sprinkle an old truth, and that'll like throw him off the scent, and then it doesn't. Okay. I've been going for 40 minutes. I think that's probably good enough. I got a bolognese. It's hopefully not burned over on the stove. God damn it. I really love this book, and I'm really excited to read the next 6. And as always, I just want to really, truly say, I can fucking guarantee none of you other bees are watching through this whole thing. Thanks for not watching.